The skeletal princess was rejected by all, until an Apache warrior saw her soul. The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty town of Copper Ridge in 1873. Sarah McKenna pressed her face against the cracked window of the general store, watching the townspeople hurry past with their eyes averted. At 22, she had grown accustomed to the stares and whispers that followed her wherever she went. A rare bone disease had ravaged her body since childhood, leaving her painfully thin, with protruding bones and hollow cheeks. Her once golden hair had thinned to wispy strands, and her skin stretched taut over her skeletal frame. The cruel nickname, Skeletal Princess, had stuck since she was 15, when the banker's son had shouted it across the church steps. "Sarah, step away from that window," her mother Margaret called from behind the counter. "You know how people talk." Sarah's fingers traced the glass as she watched families stroll down Main Street. Children played in the dirt while their mothers chatted outside the saloon. None of them ever looked her way anymore. She had become invisible, a ghost, haunting the edges of a life she could never fully join. The bell above the door chimed, and Sheriff Morrison entered, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "Afternoon, Margaret. Sarah." He nodded politely but kept his distance, as most men did. "Any word from the doctor in Phoenix?" Margaret asked, hope flickering in her tired eyes. Sheriff Morrison shook his head. "Doc Peterson says there ain't nothing more he can do, says to keep her comfortable." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, though she had expected them. As the sheriff left, Sarah gathered her shawl and stepped outside. The afternoon heat was brutal, but she needed air. She walked slowly down the wooden sidewalk, past the blacksmith shop where young men courted their sweethearts, past the saloon where laughter spilled onto the street. At the edge of town, she found her usual spot beneath a gnarled mesquite tree. The desert stretched endlessly before her, painted in shades of red and gold. Here, away from the pitying glances and whispered prayers, she could breathe. A movement in the distance caught her eye. A lone rider approached on horseback, his silhouette dark against the setting sun. As he drew closer, Sarah could see he was Apache, his long black hair flowing behind him, his weathered face set in concentration. The rider slowed as he neared the tree. His eyes met hers, and for the first time in years, Sarah didn't see pity or revulsion. He looked at her as if she was simply another person, worth seeing. "You come here often," he said, his English careful but clear. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded, surprised by her own voice when she replied, "Every day." The Apache warrior dismounted and approached slowly, his movements fluid and respectful. "I am Ayana. I have watched you from the hills." "Watched me?" Sarah's hand instinctively went to her throat, self-conscious about her appearance. "You sit with the desert. You understand silence." His dark eyes studied her face without judgment. "In my people's way, we believe the body is just a shell. The spirit is what matters." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her about spirits or souls, only about her failing body and the burden she placed on others. "I am Sarah," she whispered. Ayana nodded solemnly. "Sarah, a strong name." He gestured to the ground beside her. "May I sit?" For the first time in years, Sarah smiled genuinely. Yes. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert, two unlikely souls found themselves drawn together by something neither the harsh judgment of Copper Ridge nor the cruel realities of frontier life could touch. The next morning, Sarah woke with a strange lightness in her chest. The memory of Ayana's words echoed in her mind as she helped her mother prepare the store for another day of cautious customers and whispered conversations. "You seem different today," Margaret observed, watching her daughter move with purpose for the first time in months. "I met someone yesterday," Sarah said simply, not elaborating on the details that would surely worry her mother. Throughout the day, Sarah found herself glancing toward the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of a familiar figure on horseback. The usual parade of townspeople came and went, but her attention remained fixed on the horizon. Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, entered the store with her usual air of superiority. "Margaret, I do hope you're keeping Sarah away from the main streets. The ladies' auxiliary is concerned about the impression she makes on visitors." Sarah felt the familiar burn of shame creep up her neck, but instead of retreating to the back room as she usually did, she straightened her shoulders. "I'm sorry my appearance troubles you, Mrs. Patterson," Sarah said calmly. "Perhaps if you spent less time looking at people's bodies and more time seeing their hearts, you might find the world a more beautiful place." Mrs. Patterson's mouth fell open in shock. Margaret looked equally surprised, but said nothing as the woman huffed and left the store. That evening, Sarah made her way to the mesquite tree again. The desert air was cooler, and the sky painted itself in brilliant oranges and purples. She had barely settled against the trunk when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Ayana appeared like a spectre from the desert, his horse moving soundlessly across the sand. He dismounted and approached with that same careful respect she remembered from the day before. "You have fire today," he observed, settling beside her. "Something has changed." Sarah found herself telling him about the encounter with Mrs. Patterson, about the years of cruel words and averted eyes. As she spoke, Ayana listened without interruption, his presence steady and calming. "In my village," he said when she finished, "we have a saying. The eagle does not concern itself with the opinions of sheep. You are an eagle, Sarah. You soar above their small thinking." "I don't feel like an eagle," Sarah admitted. "I feel like a broken bird." Ayana was quiet for a moment, then reached into a leather pouch at his side. He withdrew a small, smooth stone, its surface polished by years of handling. "This belonged to my grandmother. She was born with a twisted spine that kept her from walking straight. The other children mocked her, called her crooked woman, but she became the greatest healer our people had ever known. She taught me that physical pain can teach the soul things that easy living never could." He placed the stone in Sarah's palm. "She said that broken people see the world differently. They see the cracks where the light gets in." Sarah held the stone, feeling its warmth against her skin. "Why are you being kind to me?" "Because kindness is not earned by beauty or strength. It is given freely, or it is not kindness at all." Ayana's voice was gentle but firm. "And because when I look at you, I see someone who has learned to find peace in places others fear to go." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah realized that for the first time in years, she felt truly seen, not as a burden or a tragedy, but as a person worthy of friendship and respect. The third evening brought unexpected visitors to Copper Ridge. Sarah was helping her mother close the store when the sound of multiple horses echoed through the dusty streets. Through the window, she could see a group of Apache warriors entering the town, their presence causing immediate tension among the residents. "Stay inside," Margaret whispered, though Sarah could see Ayana among the riders and felt no fear. The warriors dismounted near the saloon, their leader, an older man with silver-streaked hair, speaking in low tones with Sheriff Morrison. Sarah strained to hear their conversation, but caught only fragments about stolen cattle and boundary disputes. As the discussion grew heated, Sarah noticed Ayana standing slightly apart from the group, his eyes scanning the buildings until they found her face in the window. He gave an almost imperceptible nod, which she returned. The meeting ended with apparent resolution, and the Apache prepared to leave. But as they mounted their horses, young Tom Patterson, the banker's son who had first called her skeletal princess, emerged from the saloon, clearly drunk. "Look what we got here," Tom slurred, gesturing toward the departing warriors. "A bunch of savages come to town. Bet they're here to steal our women, though I can't imagine why they'd want any of ours." His friends laughed, but the sound died quickly as the Apache warriors turned their horses back toward the group. The silver-haired leader's expression was stone, but Sarah could see the tension in every line of his body. "You have something to say to us, boy?" the leader asked, his English perfect and cold. Tom puffed out his chest, emboldened by whiskey and the presence of his friend. "Just that you'd better keep your distance from our town. We got decent folk here." "Decent folk?" Ayana repeated, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent street. "Tell me, what is decent about a town that treats its own people like outcasts?" Sarah's heart stopped. She could see where this was heading, and she knew she had to act. Against her mother's protests, she stepped outside, her thin frame silhouetted in the doorway. "Tom Patterson," she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "You've spent 7 years making my life miserable with your cruel words, but at least I know what I am. Can you say the same?" The entire street fell silent. Sarah walked slowly toward the group, her head held high despite her racing heart. "This man," she gestured toward Ayanna, "has shown me more kindness in 2 days than this town has shown me in 22 years. If that makes him a savage, then I'd rather be among savages than among people who call themselves decent while treating others like dirt." Tom's face flushed red, but before he could respond, his father appeared from the bank, his expression thunderous. "Tom, get inside. Now!" The banker's voice brooked no argument. He turned to the Apache leader. "I apologize for my son's behavior. The boy has had too much to drink." The silver-haired warrior studied the banker for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "See that he learns to hold his tongue. Not all of my people are as patient as I am." As the Apache began to leave again, Ayanna guided his horse closer to where Sarah stood. "You have the courage of a warrior," he said quietly, "but courage without wisdom can be dangerous." "I'm tired of being afraid," Sarah replied. "Tired of hiding." Ayanna's expression softened. "Then perhaps it is time you learned to fight back properly. Meet me at the old mission tomorrow at sunset. There are things you should know." As the warriors rode away, Sarah felt the weight of the entire town's eyes upon her. She had crossed a line tonight, one that could never be uncrossed, but as she looked around at the faces of people who had made her an outcast, she realized she no longer cared about their approval. The ruins of the old Spanish mission sat on a hill overlooking Copper Ridge, its adobe walls crumbling but still standing after decades of neglect. Sarah had never ventured this far from town alone, but something in Ayanna's voice had compelled her to make the journey. She arrived as the sun was setting, painting the ancient stones in shades of gold and crimson. Ayanna was already there, seated on a fallen beam, his horse grazing nearby. "You came," he said, rising to greet her. "I said I would." Sarah looked around at the ruins, feeling the weight of history in the crumbling walls. "What is this place?" "The Spanish built it long ago, trying to convert my people to their ways. It failed, as such things often do, but the stones remember." Ayanna gestured for her to sit beside him, "just as people remember." Sarah settled on the beam, her thin frame barely disturbing the ancient wood. "What did you want to tell me?" Ayanna was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes scanning the valley below, where the lights of Copper Ridge were beginning to twinkle. "My grandmother, the one I told you about, she lived through the worst times for our people. The cavalry came, drove us from our lands, put us on reservations. She watched children starve, saw warriors broken by despair, but she never lost her spirit." He turned to face Sarah directly. "She taught me that there are 2 kinds of strength, the strength that comes from the body and the strength that comes from surviving things the body cannot handle. You have the second kind, Sarah, the kind that cannot be taken away." "It doesn't feel like strength," Sarah admitted. "It feels like I'm barely hanging on." "That is exactly what strength feels like," Ayanna said simply. "The people in your town, they do not know this. They have never been tested. They mistake cruelty for strength, but cruelty is just fear wearing a mask." Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes. "I don't know how to live like this anymore. The disease is getting worse. The doctor says I don't have much time." "Time is not measured in years, Sarah. It is measured in moments that matter. And in this moment you are alive. You are here. You are exactly who you need to be." As if to emphasize his words, a coyote howled in the distance, its voice carrying across the desert like a prayer. Sarah closed her eyes and listened, feeling something shift inside her chest. "My people believe that every person has a purpose," Ayanna continued. "Sometimes that purpose is to teach others through our joy. Sometimes it is to teach them through our pain, but there is always a purpose." "What's my purpose?" Sarah asked. "To show them that beauty exists in places they are afraid to look, to prove that the human spirit can survive anything, to love yourself enough to demand that others see your worth." Sarah opened her eyes and looked at Ayanna. This man who had appeared in her life like a desert mirage, but proved to be more real than anything she had ever known. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" Ayana smiled, the first time she had seen him do so. "Because recognizing the light in another person is how we keep our own light burning. Your spirit calls to mind, Sarah, not because you are broken, but because you are whole in ways that matter." As the last light faded from the sky, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope, not for a cure or a different body, but for the possibility that her life, exactly as it was, might have meaning. The next morning brought unexpected news to Copper Ridge. Dr. Harrison, a physician from back east, had arrived on the morning stage with word that he was researching rare bone diseases and had heard about Sarah's condition. Margaret rushed to wake her daughter, hope and fear warring in her voice. "Sarah, there's a doctor here, a real doctor from Philadelphia. He says he might be able to help." Sarah sat up slowly, her body protesting the movement as it always did. But instead of the usual despair, she felt a strange calm. "What kind of help?" she asked. "He didn't say exactly, but he has medicine, treatments that might slow the progression. Sarah, this could be the miracle we've prayed for." As Sarah dressed, she found her thoughts turning not to the possibility of healing, but to Ayana's words about purpose and strength. She had spent so many years hoping for a different body that she had forgotten to live in the one she had. Dr. Harrison proved to be a kind man in his 50s, with gentle hands and intelligent eyes. He examined Sarah thoroughly, asking questions that no other doctor had ever asked about her pain, her daily experiences, her emotional state. "Miss McKenna," he said finally, "I won't lie to you. Your condition is advanced, and I cannot cure it. But I have developed treatments that could significantly reduce your pain and possibly slow the progression. The question is whether you want to try them." Sarah looked at her mother's hopeful face, then out the window toward the desert, where she knew Ayana waited. "Doctor, if I take these treatments, will I be able to live normally, walk without pain, look like other people?" Dr. Harrison shook his head honestly. "No, Miss McKenna. You will still have limitations. You will still look different. But you might have more time, and that time might be more comfortable." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, weighing the doctor's words against everything she had learned about herself in recent days. "I'll try your treatments, doctor, but not because I want to be someone else. Because I want to be the best version of who I already am." That evening, Sarah made her way to the mesquite tree for what she sensed might be the last time. The desert was particularly beautiful, painted in purples and golds, and she felt a deep gratitude for all the sunsets she had witnessed from this spot. Ayana appeared as he always did, materializing from the landscape like he was part of it. But tonight, something was different in his demeanor. "You have made a decision," he observed, settling beside her. "A doctor came today. He has treatments that might help." Sarah looked at Ayana's profile, memorizing the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair caught the evening light. "But that's not the real decision I made." "What is the real decision?" "I decided to stop waiting for permission to live my life. I decided to stop caring whether the people in that town approve of me. I decided that being seen by one person who truly sees me is worth more than being accepted by 100 people who don't." Ayana turned to face her, his dark eyes serious. "And what about the warrior who sees you?" Sarah felt her heart race. "What about him?" "My people are leaving this area. The government is moving us to a reservation in New Mexico. We leave in 3 days." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You're leaving." "I am. But I want you to know that knowing you has changed something in me. You have shown me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. You have reminded me that the greatest battles are not won with weapons, but with the decision to keep living when living is hard." Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I don't want you to go, I know, but we both knew this moment would come. The question is, what will you do with the strength you have found?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "How do I go back to being the town outcast after feeling like a whole person?" "You don't go back," Ayana said firmly. "You go forward." You take the truth you have learned about yourself and you live it every day, regardless of what others think. You become the person you were always meant to be. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Ayana reached into his leather pouch and withdrew something wrapped in soft deerskin. "This is for you," he said, placing it in her hands. Sarah unwrapped the gift to find a small carved bird, its wings spread wide in flight. The workmanship was exquisite, every feather detailed with loving care. "It's an eagle," Ayana explained, "to remind you of what you are. Eagles do not flock. They soar alone, but they soar higher than any other bird." Sarah held the carving against her chest, feeling its warmth seep into her bones. "I'll never forget you, and I will never forget the skeletal princess who taught a warrior that true beauty comes from the soul." As Ayana prepared to leave, Sarah called out to him, "Wait, I need to know your real name. Ayana means eternal blossom, but what is your birth name?" Ayana paused, his hand on his horse's reins. "My birth name is Nalnish. It means he who works." "Nalnish," Sarah repeated, tasting the word. "Thank you for all your work on my spirit." With a final nod, Ayana mounted his horse and rode away into the desert night, leaving Sarah alone with the carved eagle and a heart full of newfound strength. 6 months later, Sarah McKenna stood in the doorway of the new schoolhouse she had convinced the town council to build. Dr. Harrison's treatments had helped manage her pain, but more importantly, her encounter with Ayana had given her the courage to propose teaching the town's children. The same children who had once thrown stones at her now hung on her every word as she taught them about geography, mathematics, and the wider world beyond Copper Ridge. She had discovered that her years of observing from the margins had given her unique insights into human nature and a deep well of empathy. "Miss McKenna," little Emma Patterson called out, "why do you have that bird on your desk?" Sarah smiled, her hand unconsciously moving to touch the carved eagle that sat prominently on her teaching desk. "It's there to remind me that being different isn't something to be ashamed of, Emma. Sometimes the things that make us different are exactly the things that make us special." Mrs. Patterson, who had come to collect her daughter, stood in the doorway listening. Over the months, she had watched Sarah transform from a cowering outcast into a confident, respected teacher. The change had forced many in the town to examine their own behavior. "Miss McKenna," Mrs. Patterson said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I said some terrible things, treated you in ways that were unforgivable." "You didn't deserve that." Sarah looked at the woman who had once been her tormentor, seeing not an enemy, but a person struggling with her own fears and limitations. "We all make mistakes, Mrs. Patterson. The question is what we do after we recognize them." As the school day ended and the children filed out, Sarah remained at her desk, grading papers and planning lessons. Through the window she could see the desert stretching endlessly toward the horizon, painted in the familiar golds and purples of sunset. She thought of Ayana often, wondering if he was watching similar sunsets from his new home in New Mexico. She had never received word from him, but she hadn't expected to. Their time together had been complete in itself, a perfect moment of connection that needed no follow-up. Margaret entered the schoolhouse, carrying a cup of tea and wearing a smile that had become increasingly common as she watched her daughter bloom. "How was your day, dear?" "Good, Mama. Really good." Sarah accepted the tea gratefully, feeling the warmth spread through her still thin frame. "I think I'm finally becoming the person I was meant to be." "And who is that?" Sarah looked out at the desert, at the mesquite tree where she had learned to see herself through different eyes, at the ruins of the old mission where she had discovered her own strength. "Someone who knows that being broken in one way can make you whole in another. Someone who understands that the opinion of one person who truly sees you is worth more than the approval of 1,000 who don't. Someone who isn't afraid to soar alone." As the sun set over Copper Ridge, Sarah McKenna sat in her schoolhouse, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived, children's drawings on the walls, books she had read and reread, and on her desk, a carved eagle with wings spread wide, reminding her daily that she was exactly who she needed to be. The skeletal princess had indeed been rejected by all, until an Apache warrior saw her soul. But more importantly, she had learned to see it herself. And in that seeing, she had found not just acceptance, but the courage to live fully in the body and life she had been given. The desert wind whispered through the open windows, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of tomorrow. And Sarah McKenna, teacher, survivor, and eternal blossom in her own right, smiled as she prepared for another day of showing the world that true beauty comes from the strength to keep blooming, even in the hardest ground.